Okay, so we're going to get started right now on our first speaker. And I want to thank our Vice President, Tim Dixon, for setting this up. Allison Holdorf Polhill. She is the District Director and Senior Advisor to Nick Melvoin, District 4 member of the LA Unified School Board. Allison oversees strategy for meeting school and community needs by engaging parents, community members, principals, teachers, and school support staff. Allison is also a board member and Vice President of the Pacific Palisades Democratic Club. Allison is an attorney and received her bachelor's degree from UCLA and her JD from Loyola Law School. Allison and her husband, Lucius, raised their 3 children in Pacific Palisades, and unfortunately, they lost their home where they had lived for the past 20
Why don't I have audio?
In the recent fires. Allison, can you hear us?
I can.
Video,
Great.
I'm here.
So how about a big, warm welcome for Allison, and we'll let her speak for a while. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the Palos Verdes Dem Club. I have to tell you, it warms my heart to hear about phone banking going on and hub dialer, and that you are really aggregating more members right now. That's exactly what we need. And I also wanted to give a big
have I know
to Tim Dixon. Sorry, I think there's someone else on the line right now. But Tim Dixon and I are dear friends. He was actually my debate coach way back when at UCLA. And I work with Nick Melvoin. I'm his senior advisor and district director for LA Unified. I will tell you, as a Dem Club, our president, Steve Crone, and most of us VPs have all lost our homes. We've had a couple meetings since the fires with Jeff Prang, our assessor, as a benefit for the community members, people who bought their homes 40 to 50 to 30 years ago, obviously, are heavily impacted to the extent that they may want to rebuild, they're underinsured, and they want to figure out the tax consequences. And in working with Nick, we lost Pali Elementary and Marquez Elementary on January 7th. The very next day, on January 8th, we were assessing those campuses along with Pali High that serves 3,000 students from 100 different zip codes. And we were proud to announce that we reopened Marquez Elementary on a nearby campus, Norris Sterry, that was under-enrolled. So we're housing both campuses, and we are housing Pali Elementary with 400 students on the Brentwood Science Campus. And I cannot tell you, as a person who lost their home, but I have adult children who've helped me, for these young families with young kids who had to flee their homes, going back to school the next week was really rewarding. And we're going to have a big announcement, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, on reopening Pali High in a temporary spot, and possibly reopening Pali High in the fall of 2025. So that's kind of the school things that are going on. We also, as a Dem Club, we were having our annual meeting on February 2nd. We are now having that on March 2nd, and we would love to invite your club to join us. I'll be sending you a flyer. Most of the electeds that we have invited will be there, and we would love for you to join us as we strategize on how to take action with the new administration on the federal level. In addition to other things that we've been doing regarding the fire and schools, we've had extra testing and cleaning of our adjacent schools, Canyon Elementary, Revere, and Kenter Canyon. We've added a lot of psych social workers because of all the trauma with the students. And we're committed to increasing the monitoring of air quality. So many of you may not know this, but LA Unified is the second largest school district in the nation, and we deployed 200 air quality monitor systems in 2019, and they're great. And we worked with Coalition for Clean Air under Dr. Joseph Liu. But we realize now that we want to go beyond the AQI. We want to make sure that we're getting more particulate emissions and the wind direction to help for future fires. And this will help you all in Palos Verdes too, and we're happy to join forces with you. So that's something that we've committed to as a school district, and the Pali Dems are also very much in favor of. So I think I've taken up a lot of your time. I just want to mention to you on immigration, that as a school district, we have a huge campaign called We Are One. We anticipated this happening about 4 months ago. We have trained all of our parents, and I'm going to share that slide deck with you. If you want to share it with any of the folks in your area, feel free. But that is something that we are committed to. Our schools are safe zones. Our students are protesting, and we're trying to counsel those who may be undocumented themselves that you're safe when you're on our campus, but when you leave, you are not. So I think I'll stop there. I don't know if you wanted me to answer any questions. I'm happy to. And I also have, for ways that you'd like to help with the fire, you can support One Voice, which helps all of our employees who've lost their jobs in the Palisades. You can also contribute to Raise Pali, which is a Pali High specific donation. There's LAUSD Education Foundation, Friends of Marquez, and Palisades Enrichment Program. But I can put all that in the chat for you. And I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you. But I think all of our brothers and sisters in our Dem clubs need to get together and unite. Thank you.
We can't hear. Audio. I think we've lost audio, Robert.
Okay. Allison, okay. Tim, do you have anything to add?
Well, I just wanted to thank Allison. We knew each other, spent a lot of time with each other just a few years ago, back at UCLA days. But I appreciate that you took the time. I know that your life has been upside down. Aaron and I, the night of the fires, were watching local news and trying to call specifically where your house is, and we were so hopeful that you were not impacted. And dreadfully, as we saw the maps, we realized that you were right in ground zero of what was happening. And I can't imagine what you and Lucius have been going through. Well, what a loss, and people in your community. But thanks as a fellow Dem that you joined us today and spoke to us about not only this issue, but the important issue of immigration. And I'll kick it back because it's probably easier for Rob to do it in the room if you want to do some Q&A, Rob.
Thank you so much, Tim. Do we have any questions before we go online? Any questions from the group here right now? All right. Connie, we'll let you. Okay, go ahead, Connie. Go ahead. Great. Good. So Connie wants to know, how are you keeping the undocumented kids safe on campus? How is that being done right now, Allison?
So we don't allow anyone on our campus who would in any way arrest our students, period. That's a stance that we've taken, and that's how we keep them safe. And then we have all the nonprofit organizations in terms of attorneys and others who are assisting our families navigate those waters.
I have a question. Yes, go right ahead, please. Great. Someone in the audience wants to know, Allison, what if someone comes and they have a warrant? Can they still get on campus? Any organization or any law enforcement agency?
If it's related to deportation, no. Right now, that's the stance of the district.
Excellent. Very good. Any other questions? Anything about Democratic clubs working together, donating to fire? Yes, please go ahead.
NYU School of Law is doing an excellent job tracking all the lawsuits. Additionally, Mark Elias, Democracy Docket, does a great job tracking the lawsuits. So, and Democracy Forward is doing a good job fighting.
Very good. Very good. And yes, sir, a question from you.
This administration doesn't seem to follow the laws unless they like them. So I'm just wondering, what can you do to stop some of these people if they decide, we're going anywhere?
Yeah. What can you do, Allison, to stop some of these agencies because Trump and his administration don't really care about the law? How can you possibly stop them if they storm the campus or something like that?
We are not allowing them to enter our campuses, and we have strict guidance with all of the administrators on our campus and all of the educators to look for this type of activity. We haven't seen it yet. We were particularly cautious this week, and we were coaching kids in particular that were not documented who wanted to participate in these protests, which we appreciate, right? And we appreciate our youth getting out and getting their voices out and being heard about this issue, but we didn't want anyone to be in danger. So we have protocols where they're to notify our region operators, our LA school police, which we have our own LA school police, and to alert everyone. We have site crisis teams ready if need be. So we have a whole protocol that's set, and that's in the slide deck that I shared with you. What the protocols are to prevent this. We have watch commanders from our school police that are looking for this type of activity as well.
Any other questions from, yes, sir, you have a question.
So what concerns me is that students will be depending on that policy to protect them when it actually cannot protect them. So that's one issue. Another one is, what is the exact status of federal disaster relief for the fire, given what appears to be an extortion from President Trump on modifying how we do elections in California in order to receive relief? So where are we on?
Got it. So the question is, with the federal disaster relief funds, there appears to be extortion from the Trump administration. And how can we, it appears that they're asking to do extortion regarding, we have to change our election systems in California in order to receive those funds. Do you have any updates on that, Allison?
I do not, and I'm happy to get answers back to your club on that. That's a very good question. I do know that as a fire victim myself, that FEMA seems to be 100% operational at the moment. EPA, I feel for those folks that are cleaning up the site when they called me to see if they could use our schools just for their own employees. They were pretty panicked and knew that they had to take quick action because they were given directives by Trump to do so.
All right. Any other questions regarding One Voice or Raise Pally? What are the differences between some of these relief funds you were talking about, Allison, in case some of us want to get organized for that?
Sure. So One Voice is distributing funds to all of the employees that are impacted by the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire. So that's a broad brush, and they're doing many other things, as are so many philanthropic organizations. I have to tell you, the outpouring of love for our schools and our fellow human beings is amazing. I mean, you have people who've lived in the Eaton area and the Palisades area their entire lives. They're gutted. They're moving into senior living facilities. They can't rebuild. It's devastating. I mean, I know two or three school teachers who are not coming back. So that's One Voice. Then there's LAUSD Education Foundation that's distributing the proceeds to Marquez, Pali Elementary, and Pali High, in addition to all of the employees. We have so many employees who lost their homes or homes are partially destroyed. And in addition to that, families who were employers in the Eaton fire area or the Palisades Fire area. So that's where the LAUSD Education Foundation monies go to. Friends of Marquez is very specific. Those funds go to the nonprofit organization supporting Marquez Elementary. And then the Palisades enrichment programs go specifically to the funds that are supporting Pali Elementary. And then I apologize, Raise Pali, those funds are going to specifically to Pali High. So you can go broad or specific.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have just a couple more minutes before our main speaker comes. Do we have any more questions for Allison? Any comments about the fire? Connie? How is Trump's threat to cut off education funds for schools that have vaccines? How is that going to affect Pacific Palisades specifically?
Well, Trump's threat in that regard affects LAUSD schools in general. And I do not know the answer to that. I know Dr. Malhotra with LA Unified could answer that question, and I'm happy to get you the answer to that.
All right, we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll get started. One question I have is the March 2nd meeting, where will it be? And can we, if we can't attend in person, can we attend or donate online or via Zoom?
100%. So March 2nd, and I'm planning that right now. We may be at the Santa Monica Auditorium or Revere's Auditorium, and we will definitely have a Zoom component. So I'll send you a flyer on that. We're working out the details literally as I'm speaking. So we'll probably have an in-person component because our community is really craving being together, which we are scattered to the winds, as you can imagine.
Okay, understood. Understood. We have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. Anyone from the audience here today that has a question for Allison? Yes, go right ahead. Got it. Do you know anything about AB 49 that was introduced by Al Sushi regarding ICE and whether that's has been pushed through the California legislature?
I don't know if that's been pushed through yet, and I will check. So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, great. We have time for 1 more question, and then final thoughts from Allison. Yes, sir.
Preparing for this expected ISIS invasion at the end of February.
Do you know anything about parochial and private schools, how they will be preparing for the ICE invasion that is planned for the end of February?
I do not, and I will check at least with the parochial and private schools that I have contacts with, and I'll check with the central folks of the district to determine if they've been collaborating. That's a very good point.
And final question. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I wondered if you had any thoughts about how we could be in contact and support them during that transition period.
So people from Altadena and people from the Palisades who have moved to temporarily or maybe permanently to Palos Verdes, is there a way for us to contact them and help them?
That's such a beautiful thing, and thank you for saying that. I will try. I'm also on my Pacific Palisades Community Council, and I'm one of my block captains. So I'll try to capture that data. We're all networked together, and I did want to find out where everyone's moved. It's just comforting to know. And I'm right now in Playa del Rey, and the community has been so beautiful to me, all the different clubs. So I'll try to get that information to you so that you all can reach out to them. Great idea.
Great. Allison, any final thoughts? And we want to say thank you so much. And our hearts are all broken for you. But thank you, Allison, so much.
Thank you. And I do have to say, having adult children, I was able to just immediately go to work and relocate the kids. So I think that helped me quite a bit. And before the fires broke out, we did think as a Pally Dem Club that we were going to galvanize support because we had people now that really needed to take action and collaborate with all of our clubs. So I want to get back to that, and now is the time for us all to take action. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Allison. How about a hand? Thank you. Yeah. Michael Hiltzik, come on down. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, this is our largest crowd since I've been installed as president, taking over for Connie. And what an honor. Michael, great to find you. I've got to read Michael's bio, and that'll take until about 4:15. And then and then after that, I wrote for the LA Times for about a year, and no one remembers me, but everyone knows Michael extremely well. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He's written for the LA Times for, is this true, for more than 40 years? Oh boy. Okay. He's business a column appears in print every Sunday and Wednesday, and occasionally on other days, if anything would be happening, right?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. He and his colleague Chuck Phillips shared the 1999 Pulitzer Prize for articles exposing corruption in the entertainment industry. And he has a new book coming out, Golden State, which is at HarperCollins. I tried to order some. They're not shipping until Tuesday.
Oh, that's too bad.
I tried ordering many copies. The Golden State is a history of California. He received his bachelor's degree from Colgate University and his master's degree from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. And he has many things to say. Our speaker next month is going to be Congressman Ted Lieu. And so Ted has a lot to live up to because this is our largest in-person meeting to date. So how about a warm welcome for Michael Hiltzik?
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming and this afternoon. And, it's always for me a pleasure to speak with this group and meet with you. It's been a few years since we've been able to do this in person, but I think I've addressed you all at least 2 or 3 times before. Kay would remember. And this time it's a special pleasure because I want to tell you this is the first talk that I'm giving about my book, which will be officially published on Tuesday. So you are, this is a maiden voyage for me on this topic. So you're pioneers or maybe guinea pigs or maybe beta testers. But I hope you'll indulge me if I stumble along the way. Anyway, let's begin by looking back. In the run-up to the election in November, I figured that one way or another was going to be important because either California was going to remain in the spotlight of the new administration by placing an exponent of California values in the White House, or California would once again land in the position of being the resistance state, protecting those values from attacks from Donald Trump. Obviously, I don't need to tell you which eventuality became reality. During the last Trump administration, California values, at least as they represented progressive policies, were vividly on display. And what are those values? Well, they include a recognition that immigration is a builder of communities, not a cost, a welcoming attitude toward diversity and inclusion and equality, the safeguarding of rights of women's reproductive health and transgender individuals, and an appreciation of the importance of environmental regulation to stave off water and air pollution. Then Attorney General Xavier Becerra ultimately filed or participated in 122 lawsuits against the Trump administration, including 9 cases filed on Trump's very last day in office. this state had worked hard to erect legal barriers against the full spectrum of Trump policymaking, including his efforts to undermine the Endangered Species Act and to roll back environmental regulation. California was on the winning side of the vast majority of these cases at the trial and appellate levels of federal courts. And in fact, Trump did worse than any other recent president in terms of his victories in federal court to defend his policies. So that's the vista that again confronts us today. But the story is more complicated. I began my book as an inquiry into what California has taught the rest of the country and indeed the world. But as I delved into the subject, it rapidly became clear that much of California taught the country and the world wasn't always what we would want the world to know. A look at California's longer history tells us that this state has not always been a beacon of liberalism and progressivism. Red state conservatives love to run against California, depicting it as a hive of leftist political activity, but they have things wrong if we look at the long picture. Although it's fair to say that much of what we think of as progressivism was nurtured here and to some extent born here. Think of the early 1900s when our governor at the time, Hiram Johnson, served as Teddy Roosevelt's running mate on the 1912 Progressive Party, that's the Bull Moose Party presidential ticket. But the state's history has also encompassed long stretches of racist and reactionary politics. California gave us Hiram Johnson and Jerry Brown and Nancy Pelosi, indeed Kamala Harris, but also Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. It may be a paragon of inclusiveness and diversity today, but in the 1860s, this state conducted a campaign of genocide against its Indian tribes that matched and indeed exceeded the violence and the viciousness that the Indian tribes faced elsewhere in the country. In the 1880s, it gave birth to an anti-Chinese movement that spread nationwide, culminating in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. That federal law wasn't repealed until 1943, and even after it was repealed, the federal government still placed very, very strict limits on Chinese immigration. In the early 1900s, California launched anti-Japanese policies that culminated in the Japanese incarceration of 1942, a policy assiduously promoted with openly and truly shockingly racist rhetoric by the state's attorney general at the time and its future governor, a man we remember as Earl Warren. In more recent times, Californians have sometimes waged political battles with themselves. In 1994, voters overwhelmingly adopted Proposition 187, which aimed to bar undocumented immigrants from access to public education, public health care, and many other public services. The measure passed 60% to 40%, and it helped Republican Governor Pete Wilson win re-election. And in 2008, California voters passed Proposition 8, which banned same-sex marriages by instilling the idea that marriage could only be between a man and a woman in the state constitution. That one passed more narrowly, 52 to 48, but it still passed. Both measures were eventually overturned in federal court, but it's their longer-term ramifications that I find more interesting. The passage of 187 energized a shift of California voters toward the Democratic Party, not only Hispanic voters, but non-Hispanic whites. And since then, the California Republican Party has more or less gone out of business. At this moment, the number of Republicans holding statewide office is, I'm sure you can all tell me, it's 0. Public sentiment favoring same-sex marriage has only grown in California and across the nation, But Prop 8 was formally repealed by voters only last year when a ballot measure struck its language from the Constitution, and the vote in favor that time was 60-40. Notwithstanding the ebb and flow of voter opinion over the years, one thing that stands out for me about California is that its politicians know more about their constituents' hopes and desires than those of almost any other state. And that's because this is a state that erects no obstacles to eligible voters. If you are old enough to vote and you register, you can cast your ballot. There are no ID laws, no narrow restrictions on voting hours, no purging of voter rolls. You can cast your ballot either at a polling place or by mail, simply by asking for a mail ballot. California politicians know what their constituents favor. They don't have to resort to voter suppression to enact policies that they know their constituents won't like. And that doesn't mean that California voters invariably speak with a single voice or that they're invariably liberal, only that they know their voices will be heard. So where are we today? Well, the present, sometimes it's hard to keep up. I write in my book that the first decades of the 21st century were not kind to the state. Multi-year droughts struck in 2007, 2012, and 2020, aggravating the water supply crisis that had been building since the 1970s or even earlier. A shortage of affordable housing within reasonable commuting distance intensified, fueling a seemingly relentless run-up in home prices. The cost of public services continued to rise. The University of California raised its tuition 5 times from 2000 through 2021, and thereafter instituted an annual increase tied to inflation. This for a university education that had been effectively free to in-state residents until the 1960s. And who ended that, by the way? Ronald with me, Ronald Reagan. 9 of the 10 worst wildfires and 17 of the 20 worst in the state's history, as measured by acres burned, erupted between 2003 and 2020. The so-called Camp Fire swept across the Northern California foothills in November 2023. It took 85 lives, obliterated the bucolic town of Paradise, and took firefighters 17 days to bring under control. It ranked as the deadliest fire in U.S. history until the Maui wildfire of August 2023, in which 98 people perished. And now, in terms of sheer destructiveness, the Maui fire has to take second place to the apocalyptic events of just the last few weeks. Now, it's unsurprising that these developments would revive journalistic skepticism about California values. The Atlantic titled a July 2021 article, "The California Dream is Dying." It's a mantra we hear over and over again, arguing that the anti-growth movement had stifled the state's economy. And it's true that 2 forces are in permanent tension in California: the dream of living in a beautiful place and the inclination by those who've come to live here to keep it as beautiful as it was when they got here, by keeping others out. NIMBY, not in my backyard, in a place that in some places has become so thoroughly and densely developed that everywhere is somebody's backyard. Yet the Atlantic and the Atlantic's articles and others like it overlook the successes and virtues of California-style regulation. Over the last 5 decades, the state's legislators and voters have responded to the fouling of their water and air with some of the most stringent anti-pollution regulations in the land. Targeted businesses understandably view this as a burden, but the regulations have yielded measurable improvements in air and water quality. Smog remains an ever-present problem. In Southern California, partially because of its weather patterns, which trap polluting emissions low to the ground. But the explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo had dubbed San Pedro Bay the Bay of Smoke in 1542. Smog attacks, which had been common through the 1980s, have dwindled to a few days each year in high summer. And California's methods of addressing pollution have become models for dozens of other states. In that respect, it is a national leader. Still, increasingly common and severe droughts, compounded by human misjudgments, trigger the unprecedented and deadly wildfires that now define summers and even winters in 21st century California. Global warming has turned an essential ecological process into a supercharged destructive force, bringing us hotter and drier summers and winters and droughts punctuated by wet years that bring down torrential precipitation in brief spans, so brief that much of it can't be corralled into man-made reservoirs for long-term storage, or the Sierra snowpack, a vast natural reservoir. Among the human misjudgments contributing to all this are the construction of residences in the wildlands, higher into the foothills and deeper into forested areas. And that's fostered fire suppression policies aimed at protecting residents and their homes, rather than allowing nature to burn off flammable detritus on the forest floor. Authorities have blamed 9 of the 20 most destructive fires in state history on power lines that electrical utilities built to serve rural and ex-urban ratepayers without ensuring that the lines remain safely out of contact with flammable vegetation. And I think we're going to hear more about Southern California Edison's role in the latest fires as time goes on. So that's where we are today. At this, I'm sorry to be the bearer of there's a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to be patient. At this moment, some people talk about how the only way to deal with California's problems is to leave. I don't think that attitude is really is very deep or will last very long. In Pacific Palisades and Altadena, people are already thinking and talking about rebuilding. And nothing will change the most fundamental fact about California, which is that it's a place of fascination to the outside world, which people want to come to see it for themselves. California is one of the few places on Earth that can be thought of both as a geographical location and a state of mind. It's the latter aspect that has beckoned multitudes. Many come not to partake of its natural riches, though these are plentiful, but to carry forward their personal quest for a fresh start mentally, intellectually, spiritually. California was the destination of all 3 of the great human migrations of American history: the gold rush of 1849, the inflow to Southern California at the turn of the last century that transformed an unprepossessing arid basin into the teeming Los Angeles metropolis, and then the flight from the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. The first was driven by speculation, the second by ballyhoo, and the third by destitution, but the emigrants all were motivated by the common goal of starting over. They who came to California, Joan Didion wrote, were not the self-satisfied, happy, and content people, but the adventurous, the restless, and the daring. Not all found what they were looking for, quite obviously. The doubts and worries that afflicted those who came west for a new life only to have their hopes dashed can be seen in the careworn expression on the face of Florence Owens Thompson, the migrant mother of Dorothea Lange's iconic photograph, taken at a failed farm camp on the Nipomo Mesa, scarcely 10 miles from the Pacific coast, the very end of the road. Getting a handle on this vast, diverse state is challenging, but necessary. California is often depicted as a place almost alien to the rest of the country. According to a widely repeated line, sometimes attributed probably erroneously to Mark Twain, America is built on a tilt and everything loose slides to California. He might know because he spent not a few years here working on newspapers in Northern California. Yet, as of now, California is home to more than 1 in 8 Americans. In a very real sense, it is America. To understand California is to understand America, and to understand America, one must understand California. The tug of war between California's enthusiasts and detractors is older than statehood. The gold rush instilled in a vast migratory swarm of Argonauts, as they were known at the time, visions of fortunes to be made in the valleys and riverbeds of California. And with them came the doubters. One was an adventurer from North Carolina named Hinton Helper, who arrived in the teeth of the gold rush with a skeptical chip on his shoulder. He promptly condemned for his friends at home the state's rottenness and its corruption, its squalor and its misery, its crime and its shame, its gold and its dross. He was not wrong exactly about San Francisco of the era when he was living here, just hyperbolic. To Henry David Thoreau, there was something disreputable in the grasping for wealth that defined for him the allure of the distant state. The rush to California, he wrote, and the attitude, not merely of merchants, but of philosophers and prophets, so called in relation to it, reflect the greatest disgrace on mankind. The hog that gets his living by rooting, stirring up the soil, would be ashamed of such company. Now, as far as I know, Henry David Thoreau never came to California to see for himself. So there's much more to the state's history than Helper or Thoreau could have foreseen. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake ranks with the gold rush and the building of Hoover Dam in its transformative effect on the West. It would teach the outside world a series of lessons, how to respond and how not to respond to a massive civil crisis, that such an event can draw a community together and split it apart, and how a great city can rise from the ashes against seemingly insurmountable odds, lessons that will be highly relevant as we talk about rebuilding after the fires. John Muir landed in San Francisco in 1868 and immediately headed into the interior, where his path brought him to the Yosemite Valley, the centerpiece of his lifelong commitment to conservationism, the preservation of nature in its pristine state for the benefit of humankind, a very Californian concept. California would play host to a series of utopian movements, including the religiosity of Aimee Semple McPherson, who married the traditions of evangelism to the new technology of radio to create a presence for herself, and the concept of old age pensions developed by a Long Beach physician named Francis Everett Townsend, which spread from coast to coast and helped drive, in fact, frighten a reluctant Congress and a reluctant President, Franklin Roosevelt, into creating Social Security. Then there were the anti-poverty prescriptions of Upton Sinclair, a socialist who ran for governor as a Democrat and who came close to winning, but was stopped by a coalition of business and industry. The state's size and wealth has produced what economists term the California effect. The phrase was coined in 1995 to describe how our state's size, influence, and position on the cutting edge of environmental regulation helped drive many American environmental regulations upward, inspiring other states to follow its lead, like a giant planet gathering moons to its orbit by the sheer force of gravity. The phrase has come to signify the state's ability to project more than just its environmental values to a nation at large. The California effect placed the state in the forefront of movements including women's suffrage, religious evangelism, citizen legislating, progressivism, conservatism, environmentalism, and conservationism. So where are we today? Here I'd like to turn to one of the defining characteristics of California through its history and of Californians themselves, at least as I see it. And that's the sense that California is, in fact, a land apart, or as the 18th century novelist Helen Hunt Jackson described Southern California as an island on the land. The feeling of being a part of America, yet apart from America, first arose in the 1840s when the settlers who flowed into what was then a part of Mexico grew weary of waiting for the federal government in Washington to annex their territory and grant it statehood. In 1846, a rump group of settlers moved on the Mexican outpost of Sonoma with plans to attack the garrison there and declare the California Republic preliminary to joining the United States. This is my personal favorite among episodes in California history because the so-called Bear Flag Revolt unfolded as a sort of Gilbert and Sullivan farce. The attackers discovered that they didn't really have to attack the garrison because Sonoma was so sleepy that the Comandante had sent his soldiers home 2 years earlier. Ultimately, the settlers raised a flag on the Sonoma Square labeled California Republic, which had no force of law, but it did help to provoke the Mexican-American War, which led in time to, indeed, the annexation of California by the United States. And that very crude flag, by the way, which featured a grizzly bear, a star, and the words California Republic, evolved in the state flag that flies today just to my left. Although I have to tell you that the Comandante in Sonoma, the first time he saw it, said, well, that doesn't look like a bear. It looks like a pig. But it's been cleaned up since then, obviously. For several years after annexation, California was ignored, or let's say neglected, by the national government. So the settlers took it upon themselves to write their own state constitution, even though they were not a state. And they convened their first state legislature, even though they were not a state. Finally, in 1850, Congress ratified these audacious steps by making California a state. Yet in both Washington, D.C. and California itself, the new state's distance from the population centers of the East and Midwest raised concerns about how to tie the now far-flung nation together. The answer would be the Transcontinental Railroad. In the run-up to the Civil War, Washington feared that California might align itself with the Confederacy unless it could be guaranteed a connection that bridged the unpopulated and trackless wasteland between the Mississippi River and the Rockies. At the same time, civic leaders in San Francisco understood that for their home to become a truly world-class metropolis, which was their ambition, it needed the access to the people and markets of America that only a railroad could bring. The Transcontinental Railroad was finally completed, as I'm sure many of you know, with the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Summit, Utah in 1869. Ever since then, and in so many other ways, Californians have reveled in their independent mindset. They behaved as citizens of an independent place, displaying what Carrie McWilliams, the great chronicler of California history and culture, as, quote, a self-reliance bordering on truculence. By the turn of the last century, the state was big and rich enough for its values to weigh powerfully on national policymaking, and it only became stronger. In 1970, the federal government granted the state waivers from federal environmental rules that normally would have preempted state law, in part because the state's rules were so much stricter than federal rules. But they made so much sense that our auto emission standards have been adopted by more than a dozen other states, encompassing more than 40%, really almost 50% of the US auto market. So California's emission regulations, in effect, are the national standard. In his first term, Trump tried to revoke the waiver. He failed. But if you want to bet whether he would do it again, I'm not sure I would take that bet. California's inventiveness is what has made the state such an influential laboratory for experimentation in science, technology, and public policy. It's been the birthplace of many transformative social movements, as I've detailed in my book. Perhaps more to the point, it's the place where the ramifications of those transformations often appear first. But that points to the difficult truth that despite its efforts to hold the rest of the country at bay, California cannot really ever be fully independent. The outside world has its own way of disrespecting geographic and man-made borders. So let's start with Mother Nature. What we've seen in the last month across Southern California and in recent years in Northern and Southern California is that this state is powerless to resist the consequences of global warming. The fires raised questions about the state's water supply policies. As I mentioned in Golden State, in general, Californians have not been pleased with the natural distribution of water. Given the choice between moving people to where the water is or moving the water, Californians have almost invariably done the latter, in the process creating one of the most elaborate and expensive aqueduct systems in the world. Yet that's still not enough. Trump, in bragging about turning on the, quote, spigot to bring water from Northern California and the Pacific Northwest to quell the Southern California fires, did nothing except display his own ignorance of the facts and history. There's no spigot that could have brought enough water south to extinguish the fires, and efforts by two successive governors to increase the regional flows by driving tunnels under the San Francisco-Sacramento Delta have so far come to naught. It's clear that Californians can't go our own way on healthcare, at least not entirely. The state couldn't legislate its own single-payer healthcare system despite years of trying. It created what may be the best Obamacare health plan exchange, but the savings enjoyed by state residents are dependent on a subsidy enacted by Congress and one that Congress can take away. Our Medicaid program, known as Medi-Cal, is also dependent on federal funding, and that's especially true of Medicaid expansion, which under the Affordable Care Act receives 90% of its funding from the federal government. The authors of Project 2025, that blueprint for the current Trump term, advocate trimming that funding by more than a third, which would cost the state about $8 billion a year. California is a haven for abortion rights, transgender individuals, and others whose protections from discrimination and legislative interference could be threatened by Congress and the Trump White House. If they enact a nationwide ban on abortion or even on the distribution of the abortion drug mifepristone, there may be little that California can do to keep abortions legal and accessible. So California's position as a resistance state to the extra-legal actions and policies of Trump look secure. So let me close by emphasizing again the inventiveness and energy of California and Californians when they set themselves to solving their problems, including problems of their own making. California is a seedbed of innovation, and it will continue to be so. And that should give hope to all of us, to Californians and Americans coast to coast, that when solutions to crises are needed, there's a good chance that they will originate right here. And with that, I will leave it and I'll throw the floor open to questions. Yes.
HarperCollins.com, you get 20% off. It's actually less if you do it through HarperCollins.com than through Amazon. And probably you get more royalties.
Well, I don't know about that. But, you know, it's, if you want to order the book, that's great.
Fantastic column. His last two columns were Trump's assault on science will make Americans dumber and sicker. And Trump's move to kill federal consumer watchdog will protect big business, but cost consumers billions. So this is what Michael represents. Fantastic columnist, and I can't wait to get his book, which I will order again on Tuesday when they let me.
Okay, good
All
luck.
right, and then we're going to open
Thanks.
right now for questions for Michael. So
Okay.
This is an abstract, theoretical, hypothetical, within the course of human events kind of a question. You speak about the unique nature of California. A number of us at the University of California have been thinking about how, when Trump was elected, he acted more like someone who would conquer or entitled spoils. A colleague has drafted a conditional, what he calls a conditional declaration of independence for California. There are other movements to perhaps separate California from the Trump advances. Is it conceivable, given the history of California, given your observations and your accurate observations, I would say, about California, that it could possibly become independent from the United States?
Well, all right. I think the question of whether a state can secede has been answered. And look, we talk a lot about how California has the 5th largest economy in the world. And I've written, you know, tell a story on myself. I've used that that concept, but I've also written columns debunking it. One of the things that makes, or what makes California's economy so strong is its relationship with the rest of the country and its relationship as a state with the rest of the world. I think if California wanted to separate itself from the rest of the United States, that would cause more problems than it would solve. And I think we've seen that if you look at what the UK is going through with Brexit, that the ties at this point are so strong, the state is so deeply integrated with the rest of the country that that's the way it will be. I think we're better off trying to enforce or at least instill California values on the rest of the country than going it alone.
for the people online, because we have a large contingent there, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Sure. Ma'am?
Background, business. How do you project the future of California given such things as AI and the problems with retail businesses and generally overcrowding, the cost of housing? How do you project the future and business?
The question is how I project the future of California, I guess its economy, given AI and issues with retail trade and overpopulation and housing costs. I think these are all legitimate issues. AI, as I'm sure you all know, is the center of AI technology is here in California. I won't go into this, but my personal opinion is that 90% of AI is hype. It's a marketing slogan more than something that other businesses actually have found ways to exploit. But I think whatever you want to say about the challenges facing California's economy, it is still by far the largest economy of any state in the United States, and it's the most diverse economy. And I think that is what is its saving grace. And we have seen that over the last half century or more, that this is an economy that reinvents itself over and over again. This is the birth of the computer, of computer science, computer technology. It's been the birth of so many new technologies, and it will continue to be so because there's a critical mass here of talent and intellect and capital. Yes, sir, in the back.
Preparing your book, sure that your research was enriched by the journalistic record, the incredible journalistic record that we've had in the past, including by the Los Angeles Times. And I wondered if you have any thoughts about what future California biographers will be able to do when we see the hollowing out of cherished institutions, including our own LA Times. What will the sources be that future people will find when we lose those journalistic voices that talk about what's going on?
Right. Well, the question boils down to what's the future of California journalism and the LA Times in particular. I know. I think historians of the future will have a lot of sources to deal with, as I did. I mean, I certainly mined contemporary newspaper reports going back to the 1800s, or maybe even further. But I also partook of very many other sources, archival sources, recollections. I think people will continue to express their views about what's going on around them. So as far as the LA Times, I know there's been a lot of concern about our publisher owner, and I figured that a question like this would come up. So I'm going to tell you what I told readers who would write me to say, look, I read your column all the time, but I just feel obligated to cancel my subscription because of what Dr. Soon-Shiong is up to. What I told them, I think, three things. One is I didn't believe in doing Donald Trump's work for him by canceling newspaper subscriptions. Second, if we wanted to start talking, I've been in this game for 50 years. And if we wanted to start talking about all the times that a publisher or an owner did something that I disagreed with or that I just found counterproductive or obnoxious or, whatever, then we'd be here all night. It's nothing new. Publishers, owners have the right to do what they want, especially with the editorial pages. But the third thing I say is that I write more about Dr. Soon-Shiong's business and about his field and I've written more about RFK Jr. than probably anybody else in the paper. And I've never, not once, directly or indirectly, heard any pushback from him or the higher echelons of management. He has told our editors that what he wants to do with the editorial pages will be on the editorial pages, that it won't cross over to the news pages, which is where I work. And look, that day may come, but all I can say is it hasn't come yet. Yes, sir.
Question is, have you heard or read, seen anything about the outsized contribution that California makes to the federal government? New York and California make this incredible. You could argue if California said we're going to just lay back for a minute, the government would shrink.
Well, I don't think you have to argue it. I think that's factual. The question is, what are the implications of California being a giving state? That is, that we send more tax revenue to Washington than we get back in terms of federal programs. And that is absolutely true. What we can do about that, I think, is a different question, and I'm not sure there is anything. I mean, I don't think California, through its government, can block the payment of federal taxes from Californian businesses or individuals. But I think it is worthwhile to basically make the point that California and other blue states are the engines of economic growth in the United States, and the red states are the takers. They're the beneficiaries of the work that we all done, and that's something I think that's not really acknowledged or maybe understood by red state political leaders, such as I am.
You write about
I have written about it, but I'm sure I'll come back to it again. I think that, is there a question in the back there? No, okay. Yes, sir.
Gets the impression that the entertainment business in Southern California is in trouble. And also, I wonder if this new love affair between the billionaires in Silicon Valley and Trump is something we should be worried about in terms of California's history.
Yeah, the question is, what are the implications of the shrinkage of the entertainment industry in Southern California, and of the love affair between Silicon Valley billionaires and Trump? On the first, I would say that California entertainment industry, and I have a lot of friends and in fact relatives in that industry, has been troubled for a long time. It's still the largest center of entertainment production in the country, but it's got competition from other states, and in fact, from other countries, Canada, the UK, what have you. I don't know what the answer to that is, but we still have a critical mass of capital and intellect here in the entertainment industry in California. As for the Silicon Valley billionaires, I think there's nothing new about high-tech entrepreneurs wanting things their own way. It goes back to basically the dawn of the computer age. This has always been the case. They like regulation when it keeps competitors away. They don't like it when it prevents them from basically going hog wild with their own about their own needs and desires. In that sense, they're really no different from any other industry. I think business leaders in every industry really do want to cozy up to politicians who say, we're going to eliminate regulations, we're going to cut your taxes, and what have you. I think the mistake we make is looking for some sort of ideological component of the Silicon Valley relationship with Trump. It's not ideological, it's economic. And it's always been the case, and it will always be the case. Yes.
The actionists, which, you know, the financial billionaires from Silicon Valley, it does seem like they have a plan. And, you know, you read about, you hear about, you know, this idea of a CEO of government enterprise, you know, where that's their end game.
Look, the question is whether the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs basically have an ulterior motive and an ideology. What I would say is that basically they've the idea that government should be managed like a business is an idea so old it's almost antique. It's not the case. It's wrong. It's the motivating factor in all sorts of privatization schemes, and it never unfolds in the public interest. And it won't. So I think we just have to be on our guard to instill the idea that government is government and government does things because private enterprise doesn't want to do them, but just wants to exploit what government has done. And we're going to see that. We've seen it before. We're going to see it, I think, more in the idea that that Musk and Trump want to basically emasculate the federal funding for basic science. The way I view this is basically, the idea that, we're going to get government off the backs of the people so that big business can saddle up. So we just have to keep in mind that this is an old story. It's never been true. The reason that the federal government has such an important role in basic scientific research is because there isn't a private company or a public company in the world that wants to pay for this stuff itself, because when you engage in basic research, you don't know what you're going to get. And you can't do it with an eye toward a goal. You do it because you create the bedrock for applied research and applied science. And that's the way it's always worked. And I think that entrepreneurs and the public will come to see that very quickly. Yes, sir.
Stuff together, we produce a whole lot of stuff, but we seem to suffer from the red states in between. And it seems to me that, their news is kind of, they don't have this great journalism that you just provided with up to us today. They have Rush Limbaugh and some of these other things, and they only have a couple of cables, Sinclair and a couple of others that are really, really narrow. And I think we're suffering from that as a country because we haven't, kind of given some of our great ideas that we've nurtured into this middle part of our country. What can you tell us how we could, make that happen? Or am I way off in left field?
Well, you're not. You're not that far in right field. The question is, what can we do about the fact that there's this great complex of right-wing red state news sources that basically, I mean, what you're getting at is they mislead their public and our public. My observation is that what conservative the conservative information gang, I won't call them news, what they have that liberal or progressive or just middle of the road news sources don't have is concentration. Fox News, has a huge audience. It's not the audience isn't big enough to elect a president unless basically non-Fox viewers get snowed by it too. So I think it would be interesting if some entrepreneurs somewhere created a left or a liberal Fox News. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm not sure that the red state right-wing information sources have as much sway as you might think from the results. I think they're not followed by as much as they seem to. They have a smaller voice, but it's a louder voice, and that's the problem. Yes, sir, in the back.
Example, Musk dropped $140 billion, I believe, in the last presidential campaign. It's well in excess of $200 billion or more and rising rapidly. Is this amount of money that can be brought to bear on elections concerned within their community?
The question is, am I concerned about the financial resources that Silicon Valley, or in fact, tech entrepreneurs can inject into the U.S. election system. I'm concerned, but I'm really concerned about money that comes from corporate power all over the place, not just the tech entrepreneurs. I mean, they're more boastful than anybody else, but since Citizens United, which I can't even remember what year, 2010, I think, has been the problem for the American electoral system since it was handed down. Musk, um, I I think if you're concerned about Musk, then don't buy a Tesla and don't and discourage your friends and family from buying. That's his that that's his Achilles heel. And in fact, sales of Teslas have been falling through the floor for the last year, including in California, but also abroad and in China. Um, so how long Tesla stock will stay where it is, which is, the source of his wealth, I think is an open question, but it's been overvalued for a long time. Yes, ma'am.
All news outlets like little newspapers and everything are getting purchased by big corporations. And as internet news is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it seems like there's a real growth of echo chambers that really took hold during the pandemic when people were at home and they weren't out and about. So with this whole echo chamber thing, how it really tweaks people's thinking about what the real news is. Can you speak to that?
Sure. The question is, what's the effect of the echo chamber of news and information coming from internet-based sources? I think you're right. There is an echo chamber, and they reinforce each other. I think the real problem that we have run into is that basic on-the-ground reporting is losing its resources. And the reason that we have so many of these web-based
Substack.
well, I'm not thinking so much about Substack, but the reason that we have so much opinion reinforcing itself is that opinion is cheap. There's no overhead. You don't have to send out somebody to find something out. You don't have to pick up a telephone. In fact, you don't want to pick up a telephone because you might hear something you don't want to know. But yeah, the resource issue for legitimate legacy news sources is a real problem. I mean, we can see it at the LA Times. The size of our staff is less than half what it was when I first arrived in 1981. And it may get smaller. Now, that being said, I think if you're looking for what the value is of organizations like the LA Times, and in fact, the Washington Post or New York Times, all you have to do is look at the way we covered the fires in the last month. I think my colleagues on the LA Times, I didn't have much to do with their coverage, but I thought they showed how that sort of work is indispensable. And I think a lot of our readers, and we gained readers because of it, saw that it was indispensable. And when they needed to know what was going on, they came to the LA Times and organizations like it. And I don't want to advocate for more deadly crises to prove our worth, but this is where the rubber meets the road, really. Yes, ma'am.
If you could comment on what's being done to the immigrants being sent to Guantanamo and also to El Salvador, and these, incredible camera ready, these poor immigrants and these big military planes and the guts of these big military planes. And we know how the El Salvadorians are treating the gang members in that country. I mean, it's awful. And also Guantanamo, they have no way of being in touch with the legal world that can help them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The question is about, what can we do about basically the immigration policies that include deporting people, sending them to places like Guantanamo Bay, and inviting or trying to force them on other countries. I think it goes to something that I've noticed over the last, been about a month, right? Since January, not just 1 year. At this point, the only branch of the federal government, of constitutional government, that's working is the judicial branch. Well, look, I think thus far there have been probably 50 or 60 lawsuits filed against Trump policies. He hasn't won any of them. He's scored two minor victories when judges said that the plaintiffs in a case challenging his policies didn't have standing, which is, as some of you, if your lawyers know, is basically a technical term that under our Constitution you have to reach a certain threshold to be allowed to bring a case. But in every example where a judge has actually responded to a request or motion for a temporary restraining order, that order has been issued. And I think we are going to see that more and more. If we're sending immigrants to Guantanamo, that's not legal. Not only that, but what we know is that when they get to Guantanamo Bay is simply not equipped to take on any number of immigrants. It's just not built that way. And what we've seen over and over again is some of these initiatives and ventures and adventures by Trump have blown up in his face, and that's going to continue to happen.
City council.
Mine's set up to be a closer.
Yeah.
I to take somebody else.
No, we have 2 or 3 more questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, mine was intended to be a closer. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we get you back out to the peninsula to do a book signing?
Yeah, I'd love to do it. Love to do it. Oh, there are questions.
Let's do. Reggie, can we do 2 questions in the chat? And then
Well, actually, we only have one, and it was submitted back when we were talking about the imbalance in money going from blue states to the federal government. And the question was, because of the fires, Los Angeles residents can delay their federal tax submission. So this person was asking, would it make sense for as many people in LA to defer their tax to the federal government, just pay the state taxes instead?
Well, I'm the son and brother of CPAs, but I'm not a CPA. I'm not a CPA myself. I think that that forbearance applies only to taxpayers in the disaster zone, which I think is just Los Angeles County at this point. Is that? And you can delay it, but you can't evade it or avoid it. And I'm sure, I think that even if every taxpayer who has that right in Los Angeles County takes advantage of the delay, it's not going to really put a dent in the federal government's resources.
See if they take people away from the IRS.
Well, that's, I'm sure there are a lot of taxpayers who say, well, bless their hearts, now there's no chance I'm going to be audited. And that's exactly why the Biden administration wanted to basically strengthen the IRS.
That I saw, they were asking in terms of the court, if a court says something, who is going to enforce it? So that came up on chat. But my question had to do with cryptocurrency, the Bitcoin, and I know you've given some articles about that, but it seems to have gotten more legitimate. Oh, yeah. All right.
The question is what do I think about Bitcoin and has it become more legitimate? And the answer to the second question. Well, I think Trump's venture into Bitcoin tells you exactly what's wrong with it because, and not just because it's him, but because investors who bought his Trump coin or whatever he's calling it have been taken to the cleaners, and he's collected huge, or his family has, but those who invested in that coin have just been eviscerated. And I've written a lot about crypto and Bitcoin, and it's not legitimate. The fact that there are politicians with authority who are pushing it and administrators that Trump has put in place doesn't make it legitimate. It just really exposes ordinary Americans to huge losses, and it will have a deleterious effect on the government fisc.
I thank all the board members and everyone else here. And remember, Michael Hiltzik will be here to shake your hand. And if you have any questions, and then please, on Tuesday, order Golden State, a fantastic book. All right. And thank you. And now the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.